"Don't zip those bags," the calm female voice echoed across the field hospital. "If there's still a heartbeat, there's still a chance." The words froze everyone for a split second. 17 stretchers had arrived within minutes after a devastating mountain convoy accident, and exhausted soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the harsh white lights, convinced they were watching the worst night of their military careers unfold. Some quietly shook their heads. Others stared at the floor, unable to imagine how anyone could change what seemed inevitable. Then someone muttered with unmistakable frustration, "She's only a nurse." No one argued. No one defended her. Captain Emily Carter adjusted a pair of blue medical gloves with steady hands, her uniform marked by long hours of relentless work instead of medals meant for ceremonies. Her brown hair was tied into a regulation bun, and the expression on her face never changed. She neither acknowledged the dismissive remark nor looked toward the soldiers who whispered it. She simply stepped toward the first stretcher and checked a pulse with practiced confidence before moving to the next. Around her, alarms chimed, radios crackled, generators hummed, and helicopters continued landing beyond the canvas walls, bringing more uncertainty than answers. Young Lieutenant Ryan Brooks watched from across the room, disbelief written all over his face. Fresh out of advanced leadership school, he believed every crisis demanded specialists, senior surgeons, and impossible technology. Looking at Emily, he saw none of those things. He saw a woman carrying a clipboard instead of a command badge, speaking softly instead of shouting orders. "Where's the trauma surgeon?" he demanded. A weary medic answered without looking up. "Still 30 minutes out." Ryan stared at Emily again. "Then who's running this place?" The medic hesitated only briefly. "She is." Ryan frowned as if he had misunderstood. "Her." His voice carried just enough disbelief for several nearby soldiers to exchange uneasy glances. Emily continued examining patients one by one, calmly asking brief questions, assigning priorities, directing medics toward equipment, and checking monitors without wasting a single movement. She never raised her voice. She never hurried. Yet somehow everyone around her seemed to move faster. One private leaned toward another and whispered, "I heard she's been here almost 48 hours without real sleep." The other shrugged. "Doesn't matter. She's still only a nurse." Emily heard every word. Years in military medicine had taught her that fear often disguised itself as criticism. She had stopped taking either personally a long time ago. Instead, she focused on breathing slowly, remembering every lesson drilled into her during countless emergency deployments across deserts, forests, and frozen mountain bases. Panic spread faster than any injury ever could. Calm, on the other hand, could save an entire room. She reached the final stretcher, checked another monitor, then quietly looked toward the entrance as another helicopter approached outside. The familiar rhythm of its rotors filled the air like a countdown. Emily removed one glove, wrote a single note on her clipboard, and slipped the glove back into place. Without changing her tone, she addressed every medic within earshot. "Nobody gives up on anyone tonight." Several heads turned toward her at once. Even Ryan found himself listening despite every doubt still running through his mind. None of them realized they were about to witness the longest night of their military careers, or that the woman almost everyone underestimated would redefine what survival meant before sunrise. Captain Emily Carter moved from one stretcher to the next with the same measured pace, never allowing the growing noise around her to dictate the rhythm of her decisions. Every monitor, every chart, every quiet response from an exhausted medic became another piece of a puzzle that had to be solved before time disappeared. She glanced at the large clock mounted above the supply station. 29 minutes until the trauma surgeon was expected to arrive, assuming weather conditions did not force another delay. 29 minutes could feel like an eternity or vanish in a single breath. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks continued watching from several feet away, struggling to understand why everyone seemed willing to follow someone he believed should have been waiting for orders instead of giving them. He approached one of the senior medics and lowered his voice. Are we seriously putting the entire operation in her hands? The older medic finished securing a portable monitor before answering. No, Lieutenant. She earned these hands years ago. We are just trying to keep up with them. Ryan frowned. The answer sounded more like admiration than military protocol. Emily quietly reviewed another chart before pointing toward an empty treatment area. Move the next patient there. Keep the family notification forms separate from the active records. Double-check every identification band before anyone changes stations. Her instructions were brief, precise, and impossible to misunderstand. Nobody needed to ask what she meant because every sentence anticipated the next problem before it appeared. A young private carrying fresh supplies accidentally dropped a container of sterile dressings across the floor. He immediately apologized, expecting someone to raise their voice. Emily simply knelt beside him, picked up the unopened packages that remained usable, and said, "Slow is smooth. Smooth becomes fast. Take one steady breath, then try again." The private nodded with visible relief and returned to work with renewed focus. Ryan noticed something unexpected. Nobody inside the tent looked panicked anymore. They were tired beyond words, yet the frantic atmosphere from earlier had quietly transformed into disciplined movement. Medics crossed paths without colliding. Equipment arrived exactly where it was needed. Radios no longer carried overlapping voices. Emily had not shouted once, yet the entire field hospital seemed to revolve around her calm presence. Outside, another helicopter settled onto the landing zone, its rotating blade sending dust across the floodlights surrounding the temporary medical compound. A transportation officer hurried inside carrying updated paperwork. "Captain, 3 additional arrivals. Estimated in less than 5 minutes." Emily accepted the clipboard, reviewed the information, and nodded once. "Prepare treatment. Stations 7 through 9. Rotate the resting medics back in after 10 minutes. Hydration first. Nobody works effectively after ignoring exhaustion." Ryan looked at her with growing confusion. She was tracking patients, directing personnel, managing supplies, and protecting her own team from burnout at the same time. None of it resembled the narrow responsibilities he had imagined for a military nurse. As another group entered the tent, Emily greeted each soldier with the same steady expression that had never changed since the first helicopter landed. Fear still lingered inside every corner of the hospital, but confidence had quietly begun replacing doubt. Ryan finally realized that leadership was not always measured by the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it was measured by the one voice that remained calm when everyone else believed calm had already disappeared. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks stepped closer to the central treatment table, unable to suppress the questions building in his mind. He watched Captain Emily Carter review another chart before quietly redirecting 2 medics toward a newly prepared station. Every instruction seemed to arrive exactly when someone needed it. Still, doubt refused to leave him. He cleared his throat. "Captain, with all due respect, we should wait for the trauma surgeon before making any major decisions." Emily looked up without irritation. "If we wait, we lose valuable time. Right now our responsibility is preparation, organization, and stability. When the surgeon arrives, every second we save now becomes another opportunity later." Ryan folded his arms. "You are asking everyone to trust a nurse with the entire operation." The surrounding conversations faded just enough for several nearby medics to hear the exchange. Emily did not react to the emphasis in his voice. Instead, she finished signing one chart before meeting his eyes again. "I am asking them to trust the plan." Ryan shook his head. "Plans do not replace surgeons." Before Emily could answer, another transportation officer entered carrying a fresh stack of patient records. "Captain, communications reports another weather delay. Arrival estimate has increased to 50 minutes. The room became noticeably quieter. Several young medics exchanged worried glances. Ryan stared at the officer in disbelief. 50 minutes. The officer nodded once before hurrying toward the communications desk. Ryan exhaled sharply. This is exactly why we need someone with surgical authority here. Emily calmly turned toward the whiteboard listing available personnel. She crossed out 2 names whose shifts had ended hours earlier and wrote new assignments beneath them. Everyone has authority over something, Lieutenant. Tonight my responsibility is making certain this hospital is ready for every patient who enters it. Ryan took another step forward. Respectfully, I still believe someone else should be leading. A brief silence settled between them. No one interrupted. Emily finally answered in the same even tone she had used all night. Then help me lead. The unexpected response caught Ryan completely off guard. He had prepared himself for an argument, not an invitation. Emily handed him a clipboard. Verify every identification band at stations 4 through 9. Confirm every medication log matches the patient record. If there is one mistake, we fix it before it becomes 2. Ryan looked down at the clipboard, then back at her. That is administrative work. Emily gave a faint smile. Accuracy saves lives long before recognition does. Unsure how to respond, Ryan reluctantly accepted the assignment. As he moved between treatment stations, he noticed details he had overlooked earlier. Every supply cart was arranged in exactly the same order. Every chart used identical handwriting. Every team member knew precisely where to stand without waiting for instructions. Nothing appeared accidental. An experienced medic quietly approached Ryan while checking inventory. She organized all of this before sunset. Ryan looked around the tent again. By herself? The medic shook his head. No. She taught us how to organize it ourselves. Ryan fell silent. For the first time that night, he began to wonder whether the calm surrounding Captain Emily Carter was not confidence alone. Perhaps it was the result of countless unseen hours preparing everyone else to succeed before any emergency ever arrived. The clock above the supply station continued its relentless march forward while cold rain drummed against the canvas roof of the field hospital. Every passing minute carried another reminder that the trauma surgeon remained somewhere beyond the mountains, grounded by weather that refused to cooperate. Captain Emily Carter glanced once at the updated arrival estimate before quietly erasing it from the whiteboard. She understood something the younger officers had not yet learned. Looking at the delay again and again would never shorten it. Looking at the people standing beside her might. She gathered the medics into a small circle for less than 30 seconds. Listen carefully. We already know what we do not have. Let us focus on what we still have. We have trained hands. We have organized equipment. We have each other. That is enough to begin. Nobody answered with applause or speeches. They simply returned to their stations carrying a little more confidence than before. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks watched the brief exchange from across the room. He realized Emily had not tried to inspire anyone with dramatic words. She had reminded them of facts. Somehow that seemed even more powerful. A communications specialist hurried inside carrying another printed report. Captain, weather conditions are getting worse. Additional evacuation flights may be delayed after this next arrival. Emily accepted the report without changing expression. Thank you. Inform logistics we will conserve every critical supply beginning now. Record every item that leaves storage. The specialist nodded and disappeared. Ryan stepped beside her. You expected this, did not you? Emily folded the report neatly and placed it beneath her clipboard. I hoped it would not happen. Hope is important. Preparation is more important. Before Ryan could respond, another helicopter settled outside. The medical teams moved immediately, each person knowing exactly where to stand before the doors even opened. Nobody shouted. Nobody hesitated. The organized rhythm Emily had built hours earlier now revealed its true purpose. Every movement saved precious seconds. Every completed task cleared the way for the next one. Ryan found himself directing traffic between treatment stations exactly as Emily had instructed earlier, surprised that the system worked almost effortlessly despite the increasing pressure. A senior medic passed him carrying additional equipment. "You see it now?" Ryan looked around the crowded hospital. "See what?" The medic smiled faintly. "She has been preparing us for this moment since before any of us realized tonight would become difficult." Ryan silently watched Emily pause beside each treatment area, offering brief guidance, checking charts, encouraging tired medics to drink water, and thanking every volunteer by name. She remembered each face, each assignment, and each responsibility without ever consulting a list. It was leadership expressed through attention instead of authority. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant hills, shaking the temporary buildings for only a moment before fading into the night. Inside, nobody stopped working. Ryan slowly understood that courage inside a hospital rarely looked dramatic. Sometimes it looked like a quiet woman carrying a clipboard, refusing to waste energy on fear while everyone around her borrowed strength from her calm. Without realizing it, he no longer questioned who belonged in charge. He had started asking himself whether he could ever become the kind of leader who made everyone else better simply by remaining steady when the entire world seemed determined to fall apart. Another hour slipped by, and the temporary hospital settled into a rhythm that almost concealed how fragile the situation remained. Rain continued tapping against the canvas roof while portable lights cast long shadows across neatly arranged treatment stations. Captain Emily Carter paused beside the operations board and quietly updated the assignments for every medic before drawing one final line beneath the remaining supply count. Nobody complained when they saw how little was left. They simply nodded and prepared to make every item matter. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks finished reviewing the identification records Emily had assigned earlier. To his surprise, he found no errors. Every chart matched every wristband. Every medication log was complete. Every transfer had been documented before anyone needed to ask. He looked across the room and realized the entire system depended less on speed than discipline. Emily had built procedures that prevented confusion before confusion could begin. A young medic approached her carrying an inventory sheet. "Captain, we have fewer intravenous fluid bags than projected." Emily reviewed the numbers for only a second. "Adjust distribution according to priority. Notify every station before they open another package. Waste nothing." The medic hurried away without another question. Ryan stepped closer. "You made that decision in less than 5 seconds." Emily smiled faintly. "Preparation makes difficult decisions appear simple. The decision was made during training. Tonight we are only following it." Before Ryan could answer, another volunteer entered carrying warm coffee for the exhausted staff. Emily accepted one paper cup, thanked the volunteer sincerely, then handed the drink to the youngest medic in the room instead of keeping it herself. The young soldier blinked with surprise. "Captain, you have been awake longer than I have." Emily shook her head gently. "You need steady hands more than I need caffeine." The gesture lasted only a moment, but Ryan noticed every nearby medic straighten their posture as though the simple act had restored something greater than energy. Respect inside the hospital was spreading without speeches or ceremonies. It was growing because everyone felt seen. A weather update arrived moments later. The trauma surgeon remained delayed, and nobody could predict exactly when the skies would clear. Ryan expected frustration. Instead, Emily quietly gathered the senior medics around the operations board. "We continue exactly as planned. Review every station. Rotate anyone showing signs of exhaustion. No one works alone. If someone begins struggling, another person steps beside them immediately." Every instruction reflected the same principle. Success belonged to the team, never to one individual. As the meeting ended, Ryan found himself walking beside Emily. "Can I ask you something honestly?" She nodded. "Earlier tonight I believed leadership belonged to whoever carried the highest authority. Now I am not certain that is true." Emily continued checking equipment while answering. Authority can assign responsibility. Trust allows people to carry it. Ryan remained silent, considering the difference. Around them, the hospital continued moving with quiet precision despite the relentless pressure beyond its walls. Nobody celebrated. Nobody assumed the hardest moments had passed. Yet fear no longer controlled the atmosphere. It had been replaced by purpose. Ryan looked once more at Captain Emily Carter, standing beneath bright emergency lights with nothing more than a clipboard, calm eyes, and unwavering focus. For the first time since arriving at the field hospital, he stopped seeing her as someone filling a role. He began seeing her as the reason the entire operation still held together while the storm outside showed no sign of ending. Just after 2 o'clock in the morning, the sound everyone had been waiting for finally echoed across the temporary base. A helicopter descended through the rain and settled onto the landing zone beyond the canvas walls. Several soldiers instinctively looked toward the entrance with visible relief. "The trauma surgeon is here," someone whispered. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks felt the same hope. Surely the burden that Captain Emily Carter had carried throughout the night was about to end. The medical team briefly slowed as the aircraft powered down, but Emily did not pause. She continued reviewing treatment records, checking assignments, and quietly confirming that every patient had been reassessed according to schedule. One of the younger medics looked toward the entrance. "Captain, should we wait for the surgeon before moving forward?" Emily shook her head. "We continue until someone tells us to stop. Every minute still matters." Moments later, Colonel Daniel Mercer entered the hospital beside the arriving trauma surgeon, Colonel Nathan Reynolds, a physician whose reputation reached nearly every military medical center in the country. Rain covered both men's uniforms as they stepped inside. Reynolds removed his gloves while surveying the organized treatment areas, expecting confusion after such a difficult night. Instead, he found orderly stations, updated charts, rested teams rotating exactly on schedule, and calm voices replacing the chaos he had prepared himself to confront. His eyes moved from one treatment area to another before settling on the operations board. "Who organized all of this?" he asked. No one answered immediately because every medic was still focused on the next assignment. Finally, Ryan spoke quietly. "Captain Emily Carter." Reynolds looked toward the woman standing near the center station, where she was helping a medic verify another patient record. She had not even noticed he had arrived. "Captain Carter," Reynolds called. Emily turned, offered a professional salute, and walked toward him with the same composed expression she had carried throughout the night. "Welcome, Colonel." Reynolds accepted the updated clipboard she handed him. He expected incomplete documentation created under impossible conditions. Instead, every page contained precise notes, accurate timing, and carefully organized priorities. He turned another page. Then another. His eyebrows slowly lifted. "These evaluations were completed before I arrived?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Colonel. Every patient has been reassessed continuously while we waited." Reynolds remained silent for several seconds. Colonel Mercer noticed the unusual expression on his face. "Something wrong?" Reynolds slowly closed the clipboard. "No," he looked around the hospital once again. "Everything is exactly the opposite of wrong." Ryan watched the exchange with growing curiosity. The renowned trauma surgeon who had inspired confidence across military hospitals was now studying Emily with unmistakable respect. Reynolds stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Captain, how many physicians have been working with you tonight?" Emily answered simply. "None until your arrival, Colonel. Only our medics, nurses, and support staff." Reynolds looked around the room one final time before speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Then every person standing here should know something. What I am seeing tonight cannot be created by luck. This level of preparation, discipline, and leadership is extraordinarily rare." The room fell completely silent. Ryan glanced toward Emily, expecting pride or relief. Instead, she simply nodded once and returned to checking another chart, as though recognition had never been the reason she came to work in the first place. Colonel Nathan Reynolds remained standing beside the operations board long after he had finished reading the final page of Captain Emily Carter's documentation. The rain outside had finally begun to weaken, and for the first time since arriving, the field hospital felt almost peaceful. The organized movement of medics continued without interruption because Emily had quietly returned to helping her team instead of waiting for praise. Reynolds turned toward Colonel Daniel Mercer and asked a question that surprised everyone nearby. "How long has Captain Carter been assigned to this base?" Mercer answered, "Just over 14 months. Reynolds slowly nodded. "That explains why I have not crossed paths with her recently." Lieutenant Ryan Brooks overheard the conversation and stepped closer without meaning to interrupt. Reynolds noticed his curiosity and smiled faintly. "Lieutenant, I take it this is your first deployment?" Ryan answered honestly. "Yes, Colonel." Reynolds looked back toward Emily before continuing. "Then there is something you deserve to know." Several medics paused briefly while organizing supplies, listening without appearing distracted from their work. Reynolds folded his arms. "Years ago, during overseas humanitarian operations, Captain Carter became known throughout military medicine for building emergency treatment systems that continued functioning when everything else failed. Hospitals requested her by name because she trained ordinary teams to perform extraordinary work under impossible conditions." Ryan looked across the room in disbelief. "I have never heard that." Reynolds smiled gently. "Most people have not. She has never cared about recognition." Mercer added quietly, "She has declined multiple administrative promotions because they would have taken her away from patient care." Ryan found that difficult to imagine. In every leadership course he had attended, officers competed for advancement. Emily had apparently walked away from it. Reynolds continued, 3 years ago, an international medical conference invited her to present the emergency coordination model she designed during a disaster response exercise. Several civilian trauma centers later adapted portions of that system. "Tonight I recognized the same structure the moment I entered this hospital." Ryan glanced toward the operations board covered with carefully arranged assignments, supply tracking, and rotating schedules. Suddenly every detail made sense. None of it had been improvised. Emily had been quietly applying years of experience while everyone else believed she was simply reacting to events. A young medic approached Reynolds carrying updated records. "Colonel, every patient has now completed another evaluation cycle." Reynolds reviewed the report and handed it back with visible satisfaction. "Outstanding work." The medic smiled. "Captain Carter taught us never to wait for someone else to notice what needs to be done." Reynolds laughed softly. "That sounds exactly like her." Ryan slowly walked toward Emily, watching as she thanked a volunteer for restocking blankets before helping another medic reorganize equipment for the next shift. There was no audience around her now, no senior officers, no dramatic speeches. She worked with the same quiet focus she had shown before anyone knew her history. Ryan realized the greatest surprise was not that Captain Emily Carter had earned respect across military medicine. The greatest surprise was that she had never once tried to tell anyone. She simply carried her experience into every decision, every conversation, and every act of service, allowing results to speak long before her reputation ever needed to. Morning light slowly pushed through the clouds, replacing the harsh floodlights that had illuminated the field hospital throughout the endless night. The steady sound of helicopters had faded, leaving only quiet conversations, rolling supply carts, and the soft footsteps of medics finishing one of the most demanding shifts of their careers. Captain Emily Carter stood beside the operations board one final time, carefully reviewing every completed report before handing the clipboard to the incoming day supervisor. She spoke with the same calm voice she had used hours earlier. "Double-check every transfer before departure. Confirm every follow-up schedule. No one leaves without complete documentation." The supervisor nodded confidently. "Already in progress, Captain." Emily smiled with quiet satisfaction because that answer meant her training had become habit rather than instruction. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks approached slowly, carrying the same clipboard he had once dismissed as little more than paperwork. Now he held it with genuine respect. He stopped a few feet away and hesitated before speaking. "Captain, may I have a moment?" Emily turned toward him. "Of course, Lieutenant." Ryan took a slow breath. "When I arrived tonight, I believed leadership belonged to the loudest voice, the highest rank, or the person with the most impressive title. I also believed being a nurse meant supporting someone else who would eventually take control." He lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. "I was wrong." Emily remained silent, allowing him to finish without interruption. "I questioned your decisions before I understood them. I judged your role before I understood your experience. I thought I knew what leadership looked like." Ryan straightened his posture. "I owe you an apology, Captain." Emily accepted his words with the same grace she had shown throughout the night. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Ryan seemed surprised by the simplicity of her response. "That is all." Emily gave a gentle smile. "People learn. That is what matters." Ryan shook his head. "Most people would remind me how unfair I had been." Emily looked around the hospital where tired medics quietly helped one another prepare for the next rotation. "If I spent my time collecting every misunderstanding, would have very little time left to help anyone." Ryan followed her gaze. Every person inside the hospital appeared more confident than they had the previous evening. The youngest medics were teaching newly arriving volunteers exactly as Emily had taught them. Quiet encouragement had replaced uncertainty. Careful preparation had replaced confusion. Reynolds walked toward them carrying the final overnight report. "Captain Carter, every transfer has been confirmed." Emily accepted the report with a grateful nod. "Excellent work, Colonel." Reynolds smiled. "No, Captain. Excellent leadership." Several nearby soldiers overheard the exchange. None of them applauded. Military professionals rarely did. Instead, they offered something even more meaningful. One after another, medics, volunteers, transportation officers, and support staff acknowledged Emily with respectful nods before returning to their duties. No ceremony had been planned. No formal recognition had been announced. Respect had simply appeared where doubt once existed. Ryan watched the quiet scene unfold and realized something would stay with him far longer than any lecture from officer training school. The strongest leaders were not always the ones standing in front of the team. Sometimes they stood beside the team, making everyone else stronger without asking for attention, recognition, or credit, proving through every calm decision that genuine service always spoke louder than assumptions. By 7 o'clock, the storm had moved east, leaving the temporary base washed in pale morning light. The field hospital no longer sounded like a place fighting the night. It sounded like a place that had survived it. Wheels rolled softly across the floor. Radios carried calm updates instead of urgent interruptions. Tired medics folded blankets, sealed records, and checked each station with the careful pride of people who understood what their work had protected. Captain Emily Carter stood near the entrance, watching the final transfer team prepare the last patient for transport to a larger military hospital 200 miles away. Every name had been verified. Every report had been signed. Every follow-up note had been written in clear language no one would need to guess at later. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks stood beside her, quieter than he had been at any point the night before. He watched the final helicopter wait beyond the landing zone, its blades turning slowly in the cool air. "All 17 made it through the night," he said, almost as if he needed to hear the words spoken aloud. Emily did not look proud in the way Ryan expected. She looked grateful. "They had a good team," she replied. Ryan glanced back at the hospital, where the medics were already preparing for the next shift. "They had you." Emily finally looked at him. "No one saves anyone alone, Lieutenant." The answer stayed with him. A few yards away, Colonel Reynolds and Colonel Mercer reviewed the completed operation summary. Reynolds signed the last page, then paused before handing it back. "This report will reach command by noon," he said. "They should know exactly what happened here." Mercer nodded. "They will." Emily heard them but did not turn around. Recognition had never been the part she remembered. She remembered the private who steadied his hands after dropping supplies. She remembered the medic who drank water only because she had reminded him to keep himself useful. She remembered the moment fear left the room and discipline took its place. Those were the victories no medal could fully explain. The final helicopter lifted from the landing zone, rising above the wet ground and heading toward the brightening horizon. Everyone nearby stopped for a moment to watch it go. No one cheered. No one needed to. The quiet was enough. Ryan raised his hand in a formal salute. This time, it was not automatic. It was earned. Emily returned it with calm precision, then picked up her clipboard and walked back into the hospital to help reset the supply shelves. Behind her, younger medics followed without being told. They moved differently now, not because the night had made them fearless, but because it had shown them what steady leadership could do. Long after the helicopters were gone, the story of that night remained on the base. Some told it as the night 17 soldiers were given another chance. Some told it as the night a young lieutenant learned humility. But the people who had been there remembered something simpler. They remembered a quiet nurse who never demanded respect, never chased credit, and never stopped working. Some heroes carry rifles. Some carry scalpels. Some carry clipboards through impossible nights and teach everyone around them that respect is not announced. It is earned, one steady decision at a time.